the Trump administration has proposed a 21-point peace plan for Gaza, and it actually looks like a pretty decent peace plan. Trump is saying that he thinks a Gaza peace deal is very close, and he believes there's going to be peace. He said, "I think that we have a deal." And on Tuesday, Trump met with several Arab and Muslim leaders and presented them with a 21-point plan for ending the war in Gaza. And apparently the countries that were there were Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Egypt, Jordan, Turkey, Indonesia, and Pakistan. And Trump told these Arab leaders, he made a promise to them that he will not allow Israel to annex the West Bank or the Gaza Strip. And these leaders also demanded that Israel should not be allowed to occupy any parts of Gaza or to build any settlements in Gaza. And they also demanded that humanitarian aid to Gaza immediately continue and increase. So the Times of Israel has said that they obtained a copy of the peace plan, and these are apparently the 21 points of the peace plan. Point number 1 of the peace plan, according to the Times of Israel, says that Gaza will be a de-radicalized, terror-free zone that does not pose a threat to its neighbors. So this implies that Hamas will not be allowed to continue its operations in the Gaza Strip. Point number 2 says Gaza will be redeveloped for the benefit of its people. Point number 3 says if Israel and Hamas agree to this proposal, the war will immediately end and the IDF will halt all of its military operations and gradually start withdrawing from the Gaza Strip. This is interesting because often when countries sign peace deals, the ceasefire only actually goes into effect several days after they sign the peace agreement. So according to this proposal, as soon as Israel and Hamas agree to this peace deal, the war would immediately end. There would be a ceasefire straight away, and the Israeli military would immediately stop all of its bombing and offensives and will start withdrawing from the Gaza Strip, presumably, if the plan is followed. Point number 4 says that within 48 hours of Israel publicly accepting this deal, all living and deceased Israeli hostages will be returned by Hamas. This is also different from what we've seen in previous Gaza ceasefires. Remember that there have been 2 ceasefires during this war, and in the most recent ceasefire that took place earlier this year, from January to March, the way hostages were released was that generally once a week, about 3 Israeli hostages would be released at a time, and like 100 Palestinian hostages would be released as well. And this was happening once a week, basically, like 3 Israelis being released per week. Whereas this proposal says that within 2 days of this peace deal being agreed to, every single remaining Israeli hostage would be released. Point number 5 says once the Israeli hostages are returned, Israel will free several hundred Palestinians who have been imprisoned by Israel, serving life sentences, and also 1,000 Palestinians from the Gaza Strip who've been imprisoned from this war, during this war. 1,000 Gazans will be released as well as part of this peace deal, along with the bodies of several hundred Palestinians. Point number 6 says, once the hostages are returned, and this is very interesting, Hamas members who commit to peaceful coexistence will be granted amnesty, and members of Hamas who wish to leave the Gaza Strip will be granted safe passage to receiving countries. The reason I find this very interesting is because most Israelis probably their goal is to capture every single Hamas member and probably execute all of them. And that's part of the incentive or part of the reason why Hamas doesn't want to surrender, because they know that if they surrender, probably most of them will be killed. So this is an interesting incentive for Hamas to accept the peace agreement, because they're being told, if you agree to peace with Israel, then you will be granted amnesty, you won't be punished, and you'll even be allowed to leave the Gaza Strip if you want to, although I doubt most of them would want to leave. It's just interesting that they would be receiving amnesty under this deal. I'm not sure if Israelis there's several things in this agreement that I'm not sure Israel is going to want to agree to, and that's why I'm skeptical that this agreement is actually going to work, because I don't think Israel would be open to granting Hamas members amnesty. I think the Israelis are very determined to capture and punish every single member of Hamas. But I mean, we'll see. We still have to see whether or not Israel actually accepts this deal. Point number 7 says, once this peace agreement is reached, humanitarian aid will surge into the Gaza Strip at rates no lower than the benchmark set in the January 2025 hostage deal, which included 600 trucks of aid per day, along with the rehabilitation of critical infrastructure and the entry of equipment for removing rubble. So for several months now, very few aid trucks have been actually getting into the Gaza Strip, and a minimum of 600 trucks actually need to be coming in every single day in order to meet the requirements of the starving Palestinians. So this peace deal says that at least 600 aid trucks would be allowed into the Gaza Strip every single day. Point number 8 says aid will be distributed without interference from either side by the United Nations and the Red Crescent, along with other international organizations not associated with either Israel or Hamas. That's also interesting because Israel a few months ago actually banned the United Nations from distributing aid in the Gaza Strip because they claimed that Hamas was collaborating with the UN or something. And Israel's also been targeting and bombing Red Crescent workers. And they replaced the aid distribution from the United Nations. A few months ago, they replaced that with the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is an American aid distribution organization that's affiliated with Israel. They've been distributing aid in Gaza for the past few months, but they've been providing far less aid than what's required. And they've also allegedly been involved in the mass killings of thousands of Palestinians who've been lining up to receive aid. So that Gaza Humanitarian Foundation has been the main aid provider in the Gaza Strip, and it's affiliated with America and Israel. This point of this peace agreement suggests that the GHF would presumably no longer be involved in aid distribution, and that the United Nations would be allowed once again to take part in providing aid to the Palestinians. So that's another interesting thing that's different. Says neither Israel nor Hamas would be associated with any of the aid providing organizations. Point number 9 says that Gaza will be governed by a temporary transitional government of Palestinian technocrats who will be responsible for providing day-to-day services for the people of the Gaza Strip. So technocrats are basically politicians and ministers who are not affiliated with any political party or any political movement. So this means that the Palestinians who will run this temporary government over Gaza, the Palestinians in charge would not be members of Hamas, and they wouldn't be members of Fatah or the PLO. They would be just independent people who are just simply tasked with providing the services for the Palestinian people in Gaza. So this will be a transitional temporary government, and the committee will be supervised by a new international body established by America in consultation with Arab and European countries. It will establish a framework for funding the redevelopment of Gaza until the Palestinian Authority has completed its reform program. So this is also interesting. So the new temporary government over Gaza, it will be supervised by a US and Arab and European-led international organization. And it mentions here, so the Palestinian Authority is the official government of Palestine, but it hasn't, and it's run by Fatah, which is anti-Hamas. And the Palestinian Authority, it hasn't actually governed Gaza for almost 20 years. They only govern the West Bank. But the PA has been wanting to govern Gaza for years. So it says here, it'll establish this temporary government will establish a framework for funding the redevelopment of Gaza until the PA has completed its reform program. Now, it's not clear what the reform program is. It's a bit vague. It's not clear what that is, what that refers to. But this suggests, to me at least, that possibly the Palestinian Authority will be allowed to eventually at some point govern the Gaza Strip again. Not straight away, because initially the plan is for this temporary independent government to govern the Gaza Strip. But it sounds like it's possible that the Palestinian Authority will be allowed to govern Gaza once again, but after it's completed this reform program, which we don't know what that is yet. Now, point number 10, an economic plan will be created to rebuild Gaza through the convening of experts with experience in constructing modern Middle Eastern cities and through the consideration of existing plans aimed at attracting investments and creating jobs. Point number 11, an economic zone will be established with reduced tariffs and access rates to be negotiated by participating countries. Point number 12, pretty important, no one will be forced to leave Gaza, but those who choose to leave will be allowed to return. Moreover, Gazans will be encouraged to remain in the Strip and offered an opportunity to build a better future there. Now, remember, several months ago, at the start of Trump's second term, he was strongly advocating for the ethnic cleansing of the Gaza Strip and for pretty much the entire Palestinian population of Gaza to be forcibly relocated to Egypt or Jordan or Libya or Sudan or Somalia. He wanted to get them out of Gaza, and his plan was to rebuild it and build casinos and hotels, yada yada, in Gaza. But now this new peace plan is saying no one will be kicked out of Gaza, and also another important part is that the ones who choose to leave will be allowed to return. So the biggest concern that people have with Palestinians being forced to leave Gaza is that they wouldn't be allowed to return, because in 1948, 700,000 Palestinians, Arabs, were kicked out of what is now Israel. And ever since then, Israel has not allowed any of them to return to their homes that they lived in or that their ancestors lived in before 1948. So Israel doesn't allow Palestinians to return to their homes after they've left the country. So this agreement, or this peace deal proposal, says that if any Palestinians leave the Gaza Strip, they won't be banned from returning like Israel historically has done to Palestinians. So they would be allowed to return even if they leave, but they also won't be forced to leave the Gaza Strip. Point number 13, Hamas will have no role in Gaza's governance whatsoever. There will be a commitment to destroy and stop building any offensive military infrastructure, including tunnels, and Gaza's new leaders must commit to peaceful coexistence with Israel. So that's obviously one of the main goals of Israel and the Israelis, is for Hamas to be completely removed from power, which they've failed to achieve militarily through 2 years of warfare. But if Hamas were to agree to this proposal, they would be voluntarily stepping down from their role as the rulers of Gaza, and Hamas would be replaced with a new temporary government of technocrats, and then that would possibly be replaced eventually by the Palestinian Authority. Point number 14 says a security guarantee will be provided by regional partners, so other Middle Eastern countries, to ensure that Hamas and other Gazan factions comply with their obligations and that Gaza ceases to pose a threat to Israel or its own people. So this sounds like a security guarantee for Israel. That's just what it sounds like. I'm not sure how you're going to convince the Arab countries in the Middle East to give Israel a security guarantee. I can't see that happening, but just the idea here is that there will be a security guarantee to prevent Hamas from posing any threat to Israel, apparently. Point number 15 says America will work with Arab and other countries to develop a temporary international stabilization force that will immediately deploy in Gaza to oversee security in the Gaza Strip. The force will develop and train a Palestinian police force, which will serve as a long-term internal security body. So sounds like American-led peacekeeping forces will immediately be stationed in the Gaza Strip in order to uh, maintain security and order and to maintain the ceasefire. And they will also train a new Palestinian police force, which is interesting. Point number 16 says, another very important thing, Israel will not occupy or annex Gaza, and the Israeli military will gradually hand over territory that it currently occupies, because Israel currently controls 70% of the Gaza Strip through the ongoing military operations. So Israel will gradually hand over Gazan territory, and the replacement security forces will establish control and stability in the Gaza Strip. So no annexation or occupation of Gaza. Point number 17 says, if Hamas delays this proposal or rejects this proposal, the above points will proceed in what's described as terror-free areas, which the IDF will gradually hand over to the International Stabilization Force. So this is also interesting because with previous proposals, whenever it was argued that Hamas was delaying or rejecting peace, then Israel and America's stance was that Israel can just continue the war because clearly Hamas is not interested in peace, is what the argument was. So before, the idea was if Hamas is delaying or rejecting, then Israel must continue the war. But this point says that if Hamas delays or rejects this peace proposal, these points, these terms will proceed. They will still go forth, but only in what they call terror-free areas, which refers to the areas of the Gaza Strip no longer controlled by Hamas. So while Hamas is delaying, if it delays, then the parts of Gaza that aren't controlled by Hamas anymore, the peace process will be enforced in those areas that aren't controlled by Hamas, and you will have to wait until Hamas agrees to the peace or cooperates, and then the rest of the Gaza Strip still controlled by Hamas, then the peace process can go forward in those areas. But rather than saying Hamas won't agree to peace, let's continue the war, this rather says if Hamas won't agree to the peace, then the areas that Hamas has lost control of will do the peace process in those terror-free areas, and the areas controlled by the Israeli military will be handed over to the International Peacekeeping Stabilization Force led by America. Point number 18 says Israel agrees not to carry out future strikes in Qatar, because remember a few weeks ago Israel bombed Qatar in an area where the Hamas leadership was headquartered in Qatar, and America and the international community acknowledge Qatar's important mediating role in the Gaza conflict. Point number 19, a process will be established to de-radicalize the population. This will include an interfaith dialogue aimed at changing mindsets and narratives in Israel and Gaza. So by de-radicalize, they're referring to the fact that most Palestinians in Gaza support Hamas, which is, of course, an Islamic fundamentalist group that wants to destroy Israel. So the idea here would be re-education and de-radicalization. I'm not sure how they intend to de-radicalize the Palestinian population. Like, are there going to be re-education camps? It's not really clear. It just says that there will be interfaith dialogue aimed at changing mindsets and narratives, but I'm not sure how effective that might be. I'd be interested to see what their plan is in terms of re-education. Point number 20 says, when Gaza's redevelopment has been advanced and the Palestinian Authority reform program has been implemented, the conditions may be in place for a credible pathway to Palestinian statehood which is recognized as the aspiration of the Palestinian people. So note, it doesn't explicitly say that as part of this peace deal, a fully independent Palestinian state will be recognized. It doesn't say that this deal includes Israel recognizing the sovereignty and independence of Palestine. That's not what it says here, but it is saying that once this reform program of the PA has been implemented, then there will be a pathway opened towards Palestinian statehood. So even though it's not saying definitely there will be a Palestinian state established, it is saying that a door will be opened to the possibility of Palestinian statehood. So it's not outright rejecting any idea or concept of Palestine having independence. And obviously, the Israeli government and Netanyahu, they've been quite clear that they don't want a Palestinian state to be established. So I can't imagine Israel is going to agree to this term that allows the idea of Palestine becoming a country when Netanyahu is very against it, but we'll have to see whether or not they actually accept it. And point number 21, America will establish a dialogue between Israel and the Palestinians to agree on a political horizon for peaceful coexistence. So the terms of this peace agreement all, for the most part, seem pretty good. I mean, I was assuming that Trump's peace deal would be much more favorable to Israel, where Israel would be allowed to occupy the Gaza Strip and they just get whatever they want, and that Palestinians would be forcibly kicked out of the Gaza Strip. That's what most of us were very concerned about. But this is a much more moderate peace agreement that where both Israel and Palestinians will have to make concessions, and both of them are likely to be unhappy with this deal. But that's probably how you know you've got a good peace agreement, when both sides are unhappy. But so we'll just have to see whether or not this gets accepted. I'm very skeptical of whether or not this deal will actually go through, because in the past few months, specifically this year, Hamas has shown much more willingness to have a peace agreement and to have a ceasefire, probably mostly because Hamas is losing the war, whereas Israel has been very strongly opposed to any sort of peace or ceasefire at all. Israel has just been completely in the mindset of winning by any means necessary, defeating and destroying Hamas by any means necessary, even though it seems completely impossible. But Israel has just been completely opposed to any sort of peace or ceasefire. They've been unwilling to agree to any peace agreements this year. So and Israel was the one that broke the ceasefire in March of this year. So I really can't imagine this peace deal going through. I was very optimistic at the start of this year when there was a 2-month ceasefire. I really thought that would be the end of the conflict. Clearly, I was quite naive. After Israel broke that ceasefire for literally no reason at all, ever since then, I've just thought there's no way that there's going to be peace here, at least as long as Netanyahu is in charge of Israel. If a more moderate government comes in charge of Israel, then they'll be more open to having a peace agreement or having a ceasefire. But as long as Netanyahu's in charge and remains in power, I don't think there's going to be any peace at all. I don't think there's going to be any ceasefire. I don't think the war's going to end. That's just my opinion. This does look like a pretty good deal, but that's assuming that Israel actually follows through and actually implements all of the points, which I don't think Israel acts in good faith at all in this conflict, and Israel will probably either break the deal or they'll violate like half of the points in this treaty. So that's just what I think. According to Haaretz, which is an Israeli news outlet, Hamas has actually agreed in principle to Donald Trump's plan to end the war in Gaza, which includes the immediate release of all Israeli hostages. So it sounds positive that Hamas hasn't rejected this deal, because there have been several other deals where Hamas has said, has mostly agreed, but they've said no, but this term we can't agree with because it allows Israel to remain in the Gaza Strip, or this deal we can't agree with because of this point. So with this deal, it just sounds like they've agreed. They haven't rejected anything. They haven't raised any issues yet, at least. So from Hamas's side, it looks like they're in favor of this deal, and the Arab and Muslim countries like Saudi Arabia and Turkey and the UAE and Qatar, they're also in favor of this deal. We still have to hear from Israel. So what's interesting is, according to the Jerusalem Post, which is another Israeli outlet, an opinion poll, found that 53% of Israelis actually support Trump's peace plan, and 17% oppose it, and 30% remain undecided. Now, that I found that very surprising because everything I've been seeing throughout this war is that most Israelis want the war to continue until Hamas is defeated, which it looks impossible to defeat Hamas militarily. But according to this poll, majority of Israelis are actually in favor of this plan, and only 17% oppose it. And they also asked, according to this poll, apparently 41% of Netanyahu voters actually support this plan. This is apparently the first time since the war began that there are more Netanyahu supporters who support a peace agreement than oppose a peace agreement. So the coalition voters, this refers to Netanyahu's coalition, the poll found that 41% of coalition voters back this peace plan and 33% oppose it. And this is a much more extreme, radical, far-right faction of Israeli society who's much more hostile to Palestinians. And even among them, like 41% of them are actually in favor of this Trump peace plan. And then among opposition voters, which is the opposition parties who are anti-Netanyahu, among Israeli opposition voters, 72% are in favor of this peace plan, and only 4% oppose it. So again, in total, 53% of Israelis are apparently in favor of this Trump peace plan, and it sounds like Hamas is also in favor of this Trump peace plan. So all that we have to wait for now is that apparently on Monday, Donald Trump is going to be meeting with Benjamin Netanyahu in the White House, and they will be discussing this peace plan. Trump will be briefing Netanyahu on what he discussed with the Arab and Muslim leaders, and we'll all have to wait until Monday to see whether or not Israel actually accepts this peace plan. I'm praying that they do, because this war and this genocide just can't continue any longer. There's just too much death and too much suffering, and nothing is being achieved. It's literally just pain and death and suffering. No one is benefiting at all. And it's making the whole region more and more dangerous. So I'm hoping Trump will be able to convince Netanyahu to end the war, because even though Trump is definitely very much on Netanyahu's side, on Israel's side, Trump is also very good friends with Saudi Arabia and Qatar. And these Arab countries really want this war to end as soon as possible. So Trump will be trying to please them as well. So that's part of the reason why I think Trump will possibly be quite firm that Netanyahu must end this war, because he doesn't want to harm his relations too much with his Arab allies in the Middle East. And another part of the reason why I feel like Trump will push for this war to end and will push Netanyahu is that Trump's been bragging that he's ended 7 wars in 7 months, which is not really true, but that's what he believes. And he really wants to be able to brag that he's ended 8 wars in 8 months. So I'm sure Trump is very eager to get this war done with, because there's a growing number of Republicans who want the war to end. His Arab allies in the Middle East want this war to end, and he wants to be able to brag that he's ended 8 wars. So because of all that, I have a feeling that Trump will try to push Netanyahu to end this war and agree to the peace plan. I'm sure Netanyahu does not want to agree to this at all. I'm sure if Netanyahu could have his way completely, he would just reject it and continue the war and the genocide straight away. But I think Trump is possibly going to tell Netanyahu that he wants the war over, he wants to be able to brag about all the wars he's ended, he doesn't want to harm his relationship too much with Saudi Arabia and Qatar, and he wants to stop hearing all the backlash from American voters about the Gaza war. So because of that, I have a feeling that Israel will accept this deal. I don't believe at all that Netanyahu wants to or that his cabinet want to, but it sounds like the majority of Israelis want this peace deal to happen, and Trump definitely wants this peace deal to happen, and all of the surrounding Arab countries want it to happen. Hamas wants it to happen even. So even though Netanyahu doesn't want to agree to this peace deal, I doubt it completely. I think Israel will officially accept the peace deal on Monday, or maybe not on Monday, but within a few days. Um, and then the only question really is Israel actually going to adhere to the agreement, or is Israel going to violate the peace deal within a few weeks or within a few months? I'm personally of the opinion that Israel will break the ceasefire and will just go back to the war within a few weeks or a few months. But it depends how determined Trump is to actually end this war forever. Because I really don't think Trump wants this war to continue. So he might just not care and he might just let Netanyahu go back to doing the war and genocide. But he might, and I'm hoping, he might put extra pressure on Netanyahu to end the war. That's just what I'm hoping for. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you think that this peace deal is going to work? Will it be successful? Is this going to lead to lasting peace? Or is it going to crumble within a few months or a few weeks? Let me know what you think.